When I was in high school, I was in a musical ensemble at my church. 10 or 12 of us were chosen from our youth choir. The director wanted a name with spiritual significance, so we brainstormed together and came up with calling the group Manna. I think because we assumed the word meant something like God will provide, and because of the story that Ginger read. Most of the sermons I've heard on this story of God raining bread like dew in the morning have been affirmations that God will take care of us. And that's an important truth, the same one Ginger talked about last week, that we belong to Emmanuel, God with us. We are not alone. But here's the thing, the word manna in Hebrew doesn't mean anything deeply theological. It means, what is it? When they woke up in the morning and the ground was covered with something that was white, says it looked like coriander seed and tasted sweet, and they said, manna? They were trying to figure out what was going on. Does that sound familiar? They were told to only collect what they needed for the day and then trust that there would be more tomorrow. If they tried to save it, to make sure they had food for the future, the stuff soured and became full of worms. Maybe you've had the experience with the leftover box that gets pushed to the back of the fridge. You know what it felt like. They had to learn to trust God and take each day as it came. Now again, most of the sermons I've heard on this story stop there. And they were good sermons. It's a good story. The daily exercise in trusting God was the inspiration for lines in one of my favorite hymns, Great is Thy Faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, Thy hand hath provided. Great is Thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Jesus underlined the same point when he talked about considering the lilies and not worrying about tomorrow. But as I was reading the story this week, I kept going to the end of the chapter and found a verse I had not seen before. Verse 35 reads, "And the Israelites ate manna for 40 years. Until they came to a habitable land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan." The Israelites had escaped from captivity, from generations of slavery and oppression, only to end up in the wilderness, in the desert. Before long, they began complaining, and Moses took their complaints to God, who responded with manna. I have this kind of cosmic image of God handing sandwiches to the kids in the back seat who keep yelling, "Are we there yet? Be quiet and eat." "What is it?" "I said eat." I imagine the first few mornings were cause for wonder and even gratitude. Morning by morning, they woke up to food for the day. But then they didn't get where they were going, or where they thought they were going, for 40 years. What they expected to change quickly became the way life was. So I wonder how long it was before they stopped tasting the thankfulness. Being in the wilderness for 40 years meant the ones who came out of Egypt never knew anything but wilderness. In fact, most of those who left Egypt never got to the promised land. They woke up every morning in the wilderness and said, "What is this?" for the rest of their lives. 8 weeks into our lockdown, perhaps we're getting a taste of what they felt. A lot of days I feel like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, where he's so exhausted by having to live the same day over and over. And he says, "I'll give you a weather forecast. It's going to be cold, and it's going to be gray, and it's going to last the rest of your life." What began as something we hoped would be short-term is now something whose ending we can't predict or control. In my own attempt to begin to understand that we may be in it for the long haul, I wrote this poem last week. Maybe it doesn't get better. You may not want to read past that title, but hear me out. We can't do what we are doing just because we think this won't last and we can get back to the way things are, or were. Maybe it does get better. Actually, maybe it doesn't get better. I know, I already said that, but what if the pandemic pans out into permanence, or as permanent as things ever get? What if what we took for granted isn't granted? And we're left with life and each other for years, not days. Yeah, I'm going to say it again. Maybe it doesn't get better. Okay, I'll say it another way. Who knows what will happen? Does that help? Faith and hope hunger for uncertainty. Love knows all you can count on in life is someone else, and to let someone else count on you, because maybe it doesn't get better. Then again, maybe it does. The Israelites had to learn how to live in the wilderness as though that was what life was. Yes, they knew they were supposed to be on their way to the promised land that God had offered, but they couldn't just sit around and wait for the future to come. Because the truth is, the future never gets here, for any of us. We can't live lives that matter if they are based on what we expect to happen next. We can learn from our past and we can prepare for what we think might happen. But we can only live today, whatever the circumstances. Most every Sunday morning during the quarantine, I've come into the meeting house to take the picture of Ginger and Jake as they send out the worship service email. Those of you on Facebook see that picture every Sunday. It feels strange to be in the room without anyone else there. I long for us to see each other, to be able to hug each other, to be able to sing together, to be able to eat too many snacks at coffee hour. That day may be a long time coming. It feels odd to be standing here in the garden preaching and there's no one here to laugh at the funny parts. The decision about how and when things will begin to open up, when we'll be able to gather in person for worship, or when we'll be able to go out to eat with friends, or we get to quit wearing masks, are not decisions we get to make directly. We will respond to the circumstances rather than create them. How we spend our days, however, these days, whatever the circumstances, are our decisions to make. We can decide how we will connect, how we find ways to say we love one another, how we take care of each other, how we treat one another, how we ask for help. We can choose to make sure we all have what we need to get through the day. We can choose not to wait for normal to return or for things to get better, but to live today in this strange time as though these are the days we have to live. One of my favorite stories about Jesus happened on the night before he was executed, when he washed the feet of the disciples. In a culture that knew only sandals and dirt roads, washing feet was an act of servitude and compassion. The way John tells the story, he says that Jesus, knowing he had come from God and was going to God, knelt down and washed their feet. He wasn't waiting for what was going to happen next, or for someone to rescue him. On that day, in that room, he took care of his friends. We too have come from God and are going to God, regardless of circumstance. Whoever we are and whoever we are, wherever we are on life's journey, we are with God and God is with us. We have today to live, to breathe in the breath of God, to breathe out the love of God, even when we're wearing masks. To take care of one another, to choose morning by morning new mercies to see. Maybe things will get better. Maybe they won't. Whatever happens, we have come from God and we are going to God and we are traveling together. May we choose to do so, and may we choose to do and say everything we can to remind one another of these things. Amen.